Thank you. Good morning to everybody. Once again, my name is Beverly Roberts, and I am so excited that you decided to join me in this space today. I want to say morning because it still feels like morning. Wanted to get a sense of who was here. And so thank you all for putting in the chat where you all are from and the ages of your children. I see we've got Greensboro, 6 and 3. Samantha, Greensboro. Hey, Greensboro is representing. We've got all different age groups. Wilmington, Jasmine, beautiful town. Bladenboro, Winston-Salem. Sharika, I used to live there for a brief period of time. Andrea, good to see you again from Buckhead. Rocky Point. Well, all right. Whiteville, Reedsville, Burlington. Well, all right. We have a variety of places represented. And once again, thank you so much for your time, for joining us. And we've got a wide range of children's ages. And so I'm going to speak from that perspective because I want to make sure you go away from here feeling like you got something. But let me tell you a little bit about ECAC because we can be a resource to you. The Parents as Leaders Telling Your Story is a partnership, a collaboration between ECAC and the North Carolina Infant Toddler Program. And so ECAC, we are a parent training and information center, and we provide education, outreach, and support to families of children with disabilities across the state of North Carolina. We're funded by the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs. Most folks know us primarily by our 1-800 line. Parents call our office asking variety of questions, whether it's about the IFSP, the IEP, or just when families have had a child that was newly diagnosed. We have workshops, we do webinars, we have website, Facebook, Instagram, you name it, we got it. But I think two of the really special things about ECAC is one, our services are free to families, and all of the parent educators who talk with families are family members or have family members who have disabilities. And so we provide services free of charge statewide. The North Carolina Infant Toddler Program provides the supports and services for families and their children birth to 3 who have special needs. The ITP program is part of the North Carolina Division of Child and Family Wellbeing. So you may be saying, what are we going to do today? What am I going to get out of this today? A couple of things I hope you get out of this. Why telling your story is important, some tips on sharing your story, identify opportunities to share your story. What we're doing here today is sort of telling your story at a glance. Today, there is just not enough time to cover all the important components of the training. My hope is that you will get excited about knowing more. We do an abbreviated 2-hour training, and I am thinking over the next couple of months, we probably will be transitioning back into our 1-day training. We are not the only folks who are doing the Telling Your Story trainings. So if you have an interest in this training, I'm going to be putting in the chat my email address. If you would just reach out to me and I can share you information about our training, but also be able to put you in connection with other folks who are doing this type of training. Okay, we're going to start out with why telling your story is important and how it can make a difference. I must admit that I have never watched the Game of Thrones, and some of you may have. I heard it was a great series, but when I saw this comment about the final episode, I thought, okay. And it says, according to Tryon from the Game of Thrones, In the final episode of the season, Bran has a special power that would make him a great ruler. He was the keeper of the stories. What unites people? Tyrion asked. Is it armies? Is it gold? Is it flags? No, it's stories. There's nothing in the world more powerful than a good story. Why is a story important? Because it can make a difference. And so knowing that what you share makes a difference. Never underestimate the power of a story. Stories can change minds and hearts. Stories put a face on the issues, numbers, and the statistics to help people focus on the individual, not the system. It keeps folks focused on children and families, because that's where the focus needs to be. You are able to inform educators, providers, policymakers about what matters to families and how to best deliver services that are responsive. Talking about your experience is a way to educate, influence, change minds. And sometimes we have to tell our stories to our family members, particularly our extended family members, and to policymakers to help them to understand how to better deliver services and to be more responsive. On a personal level, telling your story sometimes can help just one other family to know that they're not alone. I can tell you, when Charles Eric was young and when he was going through challenges, just talking to another family member meant so much. And so, that is so extremely important. Sometimes we feel like, okay, if I'm not talking to the legislator or I'm not out here fighting policy and changing policy, which that's important, I'm not doing enough. But I say one family at a time. So as we think of the impact of telling your story, and that ties right into the importance of telling your story. It promotes community sensitivity and awareness. It motivates people and communities to act. I think about a parent who participated in one of our Telling Your Story trainings, and she had a story about how during the summer, there were not services or community programs for children like hers, particularly children who had physical challenges. And she took that and she shared that story in her community. Now, I'm going to tell you, it was not overnight, but eventually folks heard, and there were services put in place. There were options put in place, not just for her, but also for other families. It educates others about the needs of families that can impact systems and influence. To hear how policies, sometimes the lack of policy, sometimes it's the decisions, sometimes it's the lack of decisions, affect us, affect real people. Stories make it real. Remember, our stories are about the life that we are living, about what we know about our families. And what we know as family members is that policies need to be family-centered and based on the real needs of children with special needs. And stories help that connection. I remember this mantra. Some of you may too, not about me without me. That is still true. We, as family members, we have earned the right to sit at the table and to be heard. As you think about your stories and sharing and telling your stories, sometimes our stories may be rooted in anger. Stuff happens. Being passionate is good. And there is certainly a place for righteous anger, and it can spark others into action. Just be mindful that anger can also derail your purpose. and give folks a reason to not to listen. We can't let anything get in the way of our message. In this next slide, this is so true. I started telling my story, and the more I shared it, the more healing I received for myself. And a lot of times when we share the stories, it's the more healing that other folks receive just by hearing your story. Now, there's something that I'd like for you to do right now. I want you to get comfortable where you are. If you want to, you might, just for this, want to turn off your camera, get comfortable, because I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. And I want you to visualize a story that you might be thinking about. It could be an event that happened, something that you want to share. I want you to begin to think about that. It could be about what your feelings were like when you first learned your child's disability or diagnosis. It could be an experience with the Individualized Family Service Plan or the IEP, the Individualized Education Program. It could be some coping strategies that you want to share or supports that you've had that's worked. Has there been something that happened that said, you know, enough is enough, no more? And you want to share that? How professionals have been supportive, how they could have better been supportive. Maybe you want to share some of the hopes and dreams you have for your child. Or what's the most important message you want to share with providers, teachers, or professionals? So as you sort of think of that one thing, I want you to close your eyes and think. Imagine the sounds, where you are, the sights, and the people that are in your story. How did you feel? How are you feeling now? As an individual or as a parent? Who was helpful? Who wasn't? What was your role in the story? In your story, were you asked to make a decision? And if so, were you given all the information that you needed? What would have made this moment better for you or for your child? What would you have liked? Or what would you like now for professionals to know? Then and now. If there was one thing that you could share with folks that work with your child, interact with your child, what would you want them to know? Okay. You can open up your eyes, you can turn back on your cameras. I hope that was helpful to get a sense of your story. We're going to be talking a little bit about crafting your story. So I wanted you to have something in mind as we do. You know, a lot of times when I talk with families about sharing their stories, one of the first things that they will say is, but I get nervous. You know, raise your hand, say amen in the chat if that's you. I get nervous. I still get nervous. Being nervous does not disqualify you from sharing your story. One of the things that I have come to embrace is my being nervous is just a sign that I care. So I try to use that energy from being nervous to give me the energy and excitement that I have for sharing my story. If you are nervous about sharing your story, one of the things that I used to do was I had sort of this prepared reading. And one of the readings I used to love, and I don't know if any of you all are familiar with it, is Welcome to Holland. And that is a story, it was done years and years and years ago. And it really is a symbol for how parents feel when they first learn that they have a child with disabilities, and how, in terms of a trip that you're planning on going, but then you end up landing somewhere different. And I've always loved that story. And so I used to recite that story as the beginning, and that would give me time to sort of settle down. One of the other things that I learned is you take deep breaths and just relax. Sort of scan the audience so you just sort of get a feel for who is there. Always have a bottle of water, here's mine, to sort of sip upon. Sometimes, your voice, you'll need something to sip. And then sometimes it's a good sort of way to sort of pause, to take a sip, to sort of, catch your breath. Looking through the audience, finding eye contact with folks, even on virtually. Because one of the things that was really nice was to see you all's faces when you all were coming in. And for those who I've met before, to say, hey, that made me more comfortable. The other thing I often hear families say is, but if I tell my story, I might cry. And what I say is, for even the most experienced folks who share their story, when this is about you and your child, when this is about your family, you can get emotional and it can be difficult, and crying is okay. I think the thing about crying is it can pull an audience in. The audience just is going to have a need for understanding. What is it about the story that makes you emotional? So being able to share and help them understand your emotions and why it's difficult. And if you start to cry, it's okay to pause. Take a few deep breaths. Take a sip of water. It's okay to say to the audience, I just need a minute. An audience will appreciate that. And then when you're ready, you can go on. One of the other things that I experienced, and I can remember early on when this happened with me, I was telling my story and I saw people in the audience, they were wiping their eyes and, and I was thinking, okay, I'm connected. What I wasn't prepared for was a couple of people got up and left. And I thought, did I say something that was offensive? What? And they eventually came back, and what they told me after the presentation was, I just hit so close to home that I was telling their story and it had just hit them, and they just needed a moment. And I certainly understood. But one of the things I want you to very clearly understand, that one of the most important components of telling your story is showing the audience the authentic you. You are what makes your story special. And you just think about, you already have so many skills that can support your story. I'm going to ask you all to go to the chat again. And let me make sure I can open up my chat so I can see. All right. I would love for you all to go to the chat again. And in the chat, what I'd love for you all to do is I want you to share with me and share with us a skill you have, something you good at. You know, if you're that person, and it ain't me, that makes the best chocolate cake that everybody wants at the, holiday gathering, put that in there. This skill doesn't have to be anything about telling your story. Just tell us something you're good at. Me, I am good at decorating for holidays at home. Give me a holiday and I'm gonna decorate. Samantha is not shy. She says she's got the award-winning chili. Share. What are you good at? Because one of the things that often happens is a lot of times if someone would ask you, what am I most challenged? For some reason, it's easier for us to think about, what are we most challenged about versus what we're good at. Okay, Miss Pierce, you are editing. I need your email address. Jasmine, you've got a good sense of humor. That is a gift, and you enjoy doing crafts. Share some more, you all. That helps us to sort of get to know each other a little bit. What else are you good at? Share. What are you good at? Oh, scheduling and being organized. I need you too. Yeah, I mean, that is a wonderful skill. And we don't give ourselves credit for all the things that we do that are skills around our children and around our families. Those are important skills. And we have all different kinds of skills, all different levels of skills. We got skills we haven't developed yet. And there are skills that you have not thought about, I bet. It is a skill to be able to ask questions. I have a daughter who, I don't care, ever since she was young, I don't care what you tell her, she got questions. So that's a skill. Planning. Samantha was talking about planning family vacations. As families, we do a lot of planning. That's a skill. The ability to share your ideas and information. That's a skill. Good listener. To be able to share, you have to be a good listener. The ability to be flexible, being positive, being a creative thinker, being organized. I had someone tell me once, one of their skills was they enjoyed talking on the phone. That's a skill, because many times with sharing our stories particularly with legislators and commissioners and those kind of folks, a lot of times you do it over the phone and you leave messages. So that's a true skill. Good at social media. Many of you probably already share on social media with other folk. Many stories, some things that are happening with you. That is a skill to be able to share your story. Motivating others, willing to help others, comfortable speaking in groups, willing to listen. Those are some of the most wonderful skills, and we already got them. So pat yourself on the back. I'm doing that myself. You all already have a lot of skills that are going to help you be able to tell your individual stories. And once again, your most important skill is going to be being authentic and genuine and sharing who you are. Okay, let me throw out a couple things. When you are thinking about sharing your story, you really have to think about who your audience is going to be. Is it going to be your extended family? Something out here in the general public, like a school board meeting, a commissioner's meeting? Are you going to be talking to families of children with special needs? Are you going to be talking to students or educators, service or medical providers, parent organizations, legislators, the media? Because your story changes depending on the audience, or how you present your story can change. Because if you were telling your story to a group of other parents who are going through similar struggles that you have experienced, your story will be different than if you are telling it to a story of state legislators and representatives. One of the challenges that we often have, as we are crafting our story for our audience, most of the time is so much information. It's trying to figure out what the most important points. And some points can be different depending on the audience. Some things will grab parents differently than they will professionals. And so a lot of times is trying to be concise and figuring out what's the most important points in the story. And we have to think about the outcome. What is it that we want? Are we trying to inspire folks, motivate? Are we trying to encourage people to change their minds about something, to make a different decision? Are we trying to put a face on the disability to help folks understand and focus on families and on kids, not the system? Are we trying to provide a reality check for folks who maybe don't have a personal hands-on experience with families or children with disabilities? One of the exciting things that we do at ECAC is we have what's called a speakers network. And this is a group of family members who talk with our future educators, our pre-service teachers, about what it's like to be a parent, what it's like to advocate for your child in the educational realm, what it's like going to an IEP meeting, what it's like within your community having a child with special needs. And we get a lot of positive feedback from professors because there was research that said one of the things that particularly first-year teachers feel most challenged about is working with families. If you ask them what were the top 3 challenges, it was working with families, knowing how to talk with families. And research has shown that pre-service students who have an opportunity to interact with families, that they are more comfortable, that they have more tools to engage families when they get into the classroom. So your stories, your input really, really matters. Our stories are able to inform educators about specific topics, about your child's needs, about lack of services, about cost of services, about not having respite, not being able to find service providers. Your stories can talk about possible approaches or interventions, about providing, when I mentioned earlier about the summer program, this parent, her story told them about the type of summer programs that really would be helpful. And sometimes we want to persuade, particularly policymakers, in terms of changing a policy, in terms of helping families. And when we're doing this, you want to use powerful examples to help your audience feel your story. In words, we want you to paint a picture of that experience in words, but you can also do it in pictures. We have in our speakers network, sometimes families, they bring pictures, they bring videos, so that people can get a better feel. Sometimes when children are older and are comfortable talking about their experience, sometimes it becomes a parent-child presentation. You know, can you think about how impactful that is? But we need to remember that the stories we remember, think about stories that you remember, they make us feel something, joy, sadness, sometimes anger, but they make us feel. I think about the quote from Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said. I've learned that people will forget what you did, but will never forget how you make them feel. Want to share with you a little bit. I hope you're still thinking about that story. And at the end of sort of these details, we should have some time that you can share, you know, something about your story, what you're thinking, what was helpful today, what would be helpful. But I want to tell you a little bit about, as you think about organizing your story, there's always a beginning, middle, and end, and also that who, what, when, where. So as you think about the beginning sets the stage. It identifies the key characters. Lets us know where this is happening. This sort of gets the listener interested. So you're looking at where did the story occur? Who were the important people in this story? And where did it take place? When you think about the middle of the story, that's where the plot thickens. That's where we want the details, the examples, interesting information that you can add to help the listeners understand what it is you want them to know. So this is like, you know, when you know what happened first, what happened second, what happened next. What was the major conflict? What was the major concern? What was the major hurt? And what were some of the feelings that you were feeling, that other people were feeling? The end, it's supposed to tie up everything. But even in a story, sometimes there are loose ends. Sometimes stories are to be continued. But the end, you want folks to know what it is that you wanted them to learn from the story. What happened to sort of conclude or resolve the story? If there's no resolution, what are your thoughts about next step? What changed in terms of in the story from the beginning? How were things resolved or not resolved? What was the key point of the story? And what did you want your audience to go away with? Charles Eric started with the ma-ma-mas and the da-da-das at about 10 or 11 months. And then he stopped. At the next doctor's visit, I shared that information with the doctor. And he says, oh, boys develop language later and differently than girls. He was not concerned. Then after several months, Charles Eric still was not talking. The ma-ma-mas and the da-da-das never came back. And I went back to the doctor and he still was not concerned. But he said, Mama, if you are worried and you're concerned, just to relieve your mind, I will schedule an appointment with the local developmental evaluation center. And on the day of that appointment, as my husband was getting ready for work, he asked me if I needed him to come with me. I said, no, it's probably something simple like getting some speech therapy, because the doctor wasn't concerned, so I shouldn't really be concerned. We arrived at the evaluation center. I did not know what to expect, and we were there all day long. And at the end of the day, they took Charles, Eric, and I into a room. and my baby boy, he was sleeping quietly in my arms. And they directed me to a chair. And it just seemed like all these people surrounded me. And they began to say things like mental retardation. He will never. And you know, the first thing that came to my mind was, I remember growing up, my grandma saying, if I can just live long enough to see my children grown and able to take care of themselves, I can die happy. And the thought came to my mind, I'll never know that kind of peace. And at that moment, I just knew my life would never be the same. And I just felt like I would never be happy again. You hear about families going through a grieving process, and it felt suddenly like I had fallen into a dark hole. Yesterday, everything was okay. And just in a brief moment, my world had changed. Well, I can tell you since that day, I have been happy lots. I worked my way out of that dog hole. There were some things that they said that Charles would never do, and he did. And there were other things they said he would never do, and they were right. What I eventually realized was that I wanted the same thing for Charles Eric that I wanted for his sisters, Jennifer and Amber. And that was to reach his potential. For Charles to do all that Charles could do. And once I got there, I found my hopes and dreams for Charles Eric. Now, in the beginning of that story, I start out at home. And what I wanted to paint was sort of the everydayness of this, of that morning. You know, husband getting ready to go to work, us eating breakfast. It was an everyday thing, and the important people in that story, myself and Charles Eric. And even though my husband didn't go with us for the evaluation, he was an important character in the story. It was also important in the beginning just for folks to tap into that we were just like every other family. And then in the middle of it, we're hearing about the evaluation, the results. The conflict for me was hearing that Charles had a disability and trying to figure out, how do I absorb this into my life? How do I still have a good life? And what were some of the feelings? Sadness, fear, scared that I wouldn't have the life that I had wanted. And what happened in the end? I came to that realization that inter-conflict was replaced with hope. I could see Charles's potential. Now I'm going to tell you, those feelings that I had then, you know, life is like life is. We know sometimes something will happen and I feel sort of that helplessness again. That's okay. You know, sometimes stuff happens. But for me, the point of that story is for all that I went through, and it didn't happen overnight, I found that place where I found that strength where I could advocate for Charles Eric, could celebrate in his successes, and have the life. Having a child with a disability, it did change a lot of stuff, but it didn't change that we still had a right to a life with the joys and also the pain that anybody else would have. You know, what's important is, as we look at my family story, your family story, that you know there is no right or wrong story, that no one else is better qualified to talk about your child than you, that it is your story, how you feel and how you see it now. And your story will change and it will build. You know, I am such a advocate in terms of how we can support siblings. There are siblings out here with powerful stories. We want to encourage them also. Your story is your own. But no, you have a right to share your story when and how you want to. So feel comfortable sharing your story when you are comfortable, discussing your situation, circumstances, or emotions. Before we have a few minutes to sort of open this up, because I want to hear from you all, I want you to get a sense of that there are opportunities out here to share your stories, to speak in a variety of settings, whether it's formal like school board, or whether it is talking to another parent, talking to our pre-service and future educators, talking to other parents in parent trainings, professional development, panels for conferences, legislative hearings, presentation to teachers and students. So many opportunities out here, and all of them are extremely important. In the chat, I'm going to be putting a handout called Current Opportunities in North Carolina. And it talks about opportunities, for example, the ARC of North Carolina has openings on boards and various committees. We've got the Autism Society of North Carolina, who have volunteer opportunities. Disability Rights of North Carolina, wanting to hear your stories to help raise awareness. We have Family Support Network of North Carolina. They have a parent mentor orientation. The local interagency coordinating council. They have community-based advisory group. Each county has, is covered by a LICC, which is the local interagency coordinating council. We have the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services that have committees that families can participate in and share their stories, share their concerns. Our North Carolina Department of Public Instruction have all kinds of advisories and committees that they need the family input. With the North Carolina Infant Toddler Program, if you go to their website and scroll down to the bottom, you will see there's a link that will take you to where you can share your stories with them. And with ECAC, we've got lots of opportunities, the Speakers Network, we've got focus groups that we do, we've got Family Advisory Board and parent panels. There is lots and lots of information out here and lots of information to help you share your stories and opportunities for you to share your story. Here is our contact information. Okay, folks, feel comfortable opening up your mics, feel comfortable letting us see your faces, because we really would like to hear from you.